Parkour is one of the most all-encompassing sports in the game. Due to its undefined nature, it uses an incredible array of movement patterns. Almost any challenge that you can find and undertake with your body and an obstacle that doesn't really use equipment could be considered parkour, and this is certainly how parkour athletes do think of it. I would even go so far as to say that parkour could be considered a precursor to sport. Ido Portal talks about us not being humans and then sports specialists, but the chain being humans, movers, and then sports specialists. And I would argue that parkour is just another word for unspecialized movement practice, which in turn then lends itself to an array of other sports, which is why you'll find that parkour is a good foundation. If you've been a parkour practitioner, you'll find it's been a good foundation to lead you on to other sports and to be able to pick them up more quickly. So parkour could be considered training for other sports in and of itself, but how can we take a step back and prepare ourselves to excel in parkour as best as possible? What conditioning and mobility can we use to make sure that we prevent injury and excel in the sport? So what we need to look at are the different movement patterns and shapes that we'll use in parkour and where we're going to take impact on our body so that we can defend against the different pressures and forces that are put on ourselves. We also need to look at where we can improve our mobility and our power generation so that we can achieve a greater freedom in our movement. So there are three main categories that we need to address. That's power generation, the amount of force that you can generate; mobility, the amount of freedom you have to use that power in different positions; and then force control, the ability to handle the landings and forces that we put through our body without causing injury. And these are three categories that you can address whether you're starting out right from scratch or you're right the way through to advanced. These are three areas that you need to constantly be paying attention to if you want to improve in your parkour and if you want to make sure that you prevent injury.
By the way guys, this video is sponsored by NordVPN. NordVPN is a VPN. That means it's a virtual private network, which is essentially a tool you can use to browse more safely and privately online. A VPN works by connecting you to a server located elsewhere, which means that anyone trying to snoop on your internet behavior will only see that you connected to that server, and they won't see anything that you did from that point onwards. NordVPN does this very quickly and efficiently, so you won't notice any slowdown in your browsing. There'll be no buffering in your video playback, for example. And this has a host of other great benefits too. For example, by using NordVPN, you can connect to a server located elsewhere, thereby spoofing your IP address so that websites think you're coming from somewhere else in the world. This allows you to bypass region-locked content and watch things on Netflix and other streaming platforms that wouldn't normally be available in your country. This opens up a whole world of new content without you having to spend any more money on another subscription service. It comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk to you. NordVPN is extremely easy to use, and it comes on a wide range of different devices. And Bioneer viewers can get access to a big discount by going to nordvpn.com/thebioneer. You'll get 4 months free on a 2-year subscription, so why not check it out? Link in the description down below. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Thanks to you guys for watching. Now on with the show.
So the first thing we're going to look at is our landings. You may think that the first thing you want to look at when it comes to parkour is power production, force production, how far you can jump, and how much power you can put into your movements. But actually we want to look at the flip side of this. We want to look at our landings, how well we can control that force and power, because that's the primary concern when it comes to preventing injury. And you'll also feel more comfortable generating power when you know you can control it and put it in the place that you want it to be. It doesn't matter how far you can jump. If you're going to land really dodgily and injure your body, you're not going to have a very long parkour career. And you're also not going to feel very safe. You know, if I'm up on a rooftop, if I'm jumping across a gap, I want to know that I can control that landing and put that force where I want it. When controlling our landings, we need to think about two sides of what is the same coin. We need to think about our force control in the positions that we're going to be landing, and we need to think about how we can increase our mobility so that those landing positions are more favorable for the body. If you think about a landing, if I've got greater mobility in my hips and in my ankles, then I have a deeper squat, which means that less force is going to be going to my knees than if I didn't have access to that mobility. When we land in parkour, the main thing that we need to defend is our knees. It's the main thing that's going to become injured if we don't properly strengthen. So what we need to do is strengthen the knee tendon. I like to do this with the knees over toes lunge, and isometric wall sits. With the knees over toes lunge, we get a decent range of motion. We start to progress in our ankle flexion, but we also learn to put more and more force through our knee in an extended position. If you look carefully, it also mimics the landing position, which means that we're teaching our body how to control a force, with that landing position. It's more extreme than when you land, but it's a similar range of motion. I like to make sure that I'm doing regular tendon strengthening, usually 2 to 3 times a week, to make sure that I build up a nice thick tendon in my knee to defend against what is the most common injury in parkour. Another way to defend against these problems and create more force control is by using deceleration patterns. So what I like to do is grab a big heavy kettlebell and do nice, slow, deep squats. The kettlebell helps me to stay in a forward center of gravity when I'm doing nice, slow movements. This way you're not being held back by your ankle mobility and things like this. What we're doing when we do a slow and controlled squat is that we're mimicking the deceleration that we need when we come into a landing shape. And when you do these slow control movements, the slow deep squat, and you move slowly up and down through these positions, you're teaching your body to have control in those more precarious situations. A lot of the time we'll neglect this and we'll go a bit too fast through our squat, or we'll bounce our way up and we won't have much control in that bottom portion of the squat, usually because we're using big heavy weight. And what I would suggest is going a little bit lighter for this, and again using the kettlebell rather than a back bar squat. And this way you can really train that bottom range of motion that gets neglected quite a bit and is really essential when it comes to landing positions. Another thing that we can use the kettlebell for is to improve our squat mobility. And this is, again, like I said earlier, important so that we can create a situation where less force is being put through our knees. And as well as having less force put through your knees, the more range of motion you have in your hips and your ankles, the more you're able to control your landings in a way that allows you to stay on, for example, a rail and create that balance that you need. Because if you're rigid and you can't move in very many ways, then you can't, protect yourself from moving side to side or, falling backwards and forwards. It just creates a lot more options for you to be able to stick to the landing that you're aiming for.
I don't know if you can see too well, but on that particular swing I had really, really slippy shoes, and so when I landed, it felt like I was on socks, and if I didn't have the mobility in my ankles and my knees to adjust appropriately to where my upper body was, I could have just slipped straight off. Because if I'm rigid and I can't move around, then I can't adjust for situations that are unforeseen.
To use the kettlebell to improve your squat mobility, you want to put your hands together, pushing against the kettlebell and using your elbows to push your knees outwards. You're going to be using the kettlebell's weight not only to push you down deeper into the squat, but also to bring you forward, counteracting any immobility in your ankles. As well as hip mobility, we also want to tackle ankle mobility and ankle strength. The reason for this is, again, the more flexion that you have in your ankle, the less pressure goes to your knee and the more control you have on your landing. I like to use a combination of 2 different calf raises to improve my ankle strength and mobility. You've got one with a straight leg and one with a bent leg, and this mimics the different positions that you can have your knee in that your ankle may flex in. I also like to use resistance bands to counteract the side-to-side movement of your ankle, and this can help prevent ankle rolling, which is also quite common in parkour. One of the best ways I've found to increase ankle flexibility, or dorsiflexion as it's known, is to put your foot up on a box and to use your chest to pull yourself closer to your knee and put pressure on that range of motion. It's better if you have something to grab on underneath the box, but if you don't have something like that, you can use your kettlebell to lean over your knee. Any way that you can create pressure in that particular range of motion. This is one of the more difficult ranges of motion to tackle, and I've certainly had a lot of trouble trying to increase my dorsiflexion, but this is the best method that I've found. Something you might not have thought about and a commonly overlooked piece of mobility is actually your toe flexion. Things like a cat leap can often put a lot of pressure through your toe and cause this bend in the foot, and I've heard of a lot of people having sort of this toe injury, and I've certainly been through that myself. So what you can do to tackle this is in your general mobility routine, all you have to do is sort of sit on your heels and rock yourself backwards and forwards through that range of motion on your toes and put some pressure in that position. If this is quite a stiff area for you and you can't put full pressure on your toes right away, you can use your hands either side and just slowly but surely learn to rock forwards and backwards on your toes in this flexed position. This will help defend against that impact when you're hitting a flat wall and your toes immediately flex backwards. A lot of landings in parkour also include your upper body. You can be coming in from from a lache and land catching on a bar, or particularly in the cat leap, you're also using your upper body to grab onto the wall. This can put a lot of pressure on our pulling muscles, and particularly something that gets pulled out a lot is your lats, especially on a big landing from a lache. So the way we defend against this is very similar to how we did a slow deceleration in our squat. We're going to do a slow deceleration in a pull-up. So you're going to make sure that your arms are about the width that you would have them in your catch, and then you're going to practice slowly lowering yourself down from that chin up position. This will mimic the forces that happen when you catch yourself in either a lache or a cat leap. So mobility isn't just used for force control, it's also to allow us a greater range of movements and more freedom within our movements. There's no point in having a lot of force production if you can't move it through a wide range of motion, particularly in parkour. The more mobility you have, the more creativity you can have, the more you can move your body in different positions and put it in different scenarios with comfortability. So what we can do is have a look at some of the positions we'd like to achieve in parkour and then apply some mobility training to help us achieve a great result in that particular movement. For example, when I do a 180, I need a lot of hip mobility to open up my legs and generate that sort of turning capacity so that I can fully turn around and grab the wall behind me. And if you look, this is a movement pattern that very closely mimics the cossack squat. So if I want to generate more mobility in that area, then I'm going to practice the cossack squat more frequently. It's all about looking at what the movement appears to be like and then creating a mobility exercise that mimics that position. So for example, when I do a climb up and I end up on top of the wall, I know that I'm going to need more wrist mobility so that I can keep myself straighter and keep my body weight further over the wall. I really struggle with wrist mobility, so I have to work on this a lot. The way I tackle this is by doing a wrist mobility routine almost every day. And if you want to check out what that fully looks like, go check out the handstand video that's on this channel. I go through a full wrist mobility warm up on there. Another range of motion that's super important to increase your mobility is your shoulder range of motion. When I'm doing a lache, which is just essentially swinging from a bar and then either catching a bar, landing on a wall, landing in a cat leap. To improve my lache, what I want to create is more shoulder mobility so that the angle I let go of the bar at is less steep, allowing me to go further when I release. The way I train my shoulder mobility is by regularly doing banded overhead stretches, as well as overhead wall extensions, where you've got your body flat against the wall and you are reaching your arms above your head, trying to keep your arms flat on the wall. You may have heard me mention a lot of these exercises before, and that's because a lot of the ranges of motion that you need to acquire are quite similar for different things. So for example, increasing my shoulder mobility for my laches also helps me hold a better handstand and stay in a straight position for my handstand. So you can see it all feeds into one another, and it's all very much, worth developing and stripping back as many of the movements as you can to the more simpler positions that you need to be getting into, and you'll find that across the board you gain a lot more freedom of movement. Last but not least, we have force generation. Now this is obviously the ability to create force and to propel yourself into the moves that you're trying to do. Now the most standard one is of course a standard precision jump, feet together, jumping from one place to another. Hands down, the best exercise I've found for this is improving my deadlift. This has always helped me jump a lot further, and when I'm slacking on my deadlifts, I can really tell the difference in terms of my jump capacity. Just like with our mobility training, we want to mimic the positions that we're going to be in parkour. So for example, generating force in a step up, because you might want to step up off an object and land on another object. So what we want to do in our force production training is to train our step ups. So we put weights in our hands and find a box that's fairly high, and then we step up onto that and practice moving through that range of motion. Not only creating more force production because we're using a weighted exercise, but also we're training the specific movement pattern in a direct way. Weighted pull-ups are fantastic for things like 180s and climb-ups, where you're hanging from the wall and you've got to pull yourself up as fast as you can. You want to be training all of those pulling muscles to be able to lift yourself up as quickly as you can and generate that force in the upward direction from your arms. And finally, you want to be making sure that you train your core, because of course your core is at the center of all of your movements and it helps tie your entire body together. You want to be thinking of your body as a whole unit, and your core is what holds everything together when you're going through your movements. It helps you lift your knees up after you've jumped. It helps you hold a firm position when you top out of a climb up. I'm sure if you've ever had an intense ab workout and and you've woken up the next day with really sore abs and you realize just how much you use your abs and how hard it is to get up and out of bed if you've injured them like that. So you can see how important your core training is. Basic core training is relatively easy and simple, using things like V-sits or bicycles. You can also use what we've spoken about before, which is trying to mimic the movement patterns. So if I want to be able to get my legs up to my chest faster, then I want to do more hanging leg raises. And if I want to be holding my core in a firm position for the top out of the climb up, for example, then I want to be training my plank position. As I said at the start of the video, parkour has a wide variety of movement patterns, but I've broken it down into some of the more fundamental ones here, and we've covered the few categories that you need to make sure that you are safe when you're doing parkour and to improve your current parkour ability. You can also hopefully use what I was talking about here in terms of mimicking the movement patterns. If you've got a specific movement that you're trying to learn that we haven't covered here, just take away the principles from this video and apply it to the move that you're trying to learn. Alright guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you some insights on how to improve your movement capacities and freedoms, and yeah, I hope you implement some of the ideas here. Thanks for watching guys, I'll see you on the next one.